And welcome to TVW's Sine special coverage. This is the final day of the 2026 legislative session. Over the last 60 days, lawmakers have debated major policy changes, including a proposed state income tax aimed at millionaires, as well as police oversight legislation and a slate of other bills. Joining us first today is Governor Bob Ferguson. Governor, thank you.
Great to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you for your time this morning. Let's start with last time you were here. It was January.
Yeah.
You predicted this would happen, and it has. The legislature has passed a 9.9% tax on income above $1 million. And that's part of your legislative agenda. There was a lot of negotiation along the way.
Right.
You're happy with the final version? What actually makes it work for you?
Yeah, I'm more than happy about it. And you're right, we chatted about this 2 months ago. And just to be clear for your viewers, the tax only applies if you literally make more than $1 million in a year. So if you make $900,000 in a year, you pay zero in this income tax. It does not include the value of your property or your home, for example. So it literally applies to less than 0.5% of all Washingtonians. So that's important. Number two, when we talked 2 months ago, the key thing for me throughout this process was making sure the revenue that comes into the state of Washington, that a significant amount of it goes right back to the people, to individuals in tax rebates, to small business owners, to exempt them from the B&O tax, for example. That was really important to me. And I'm thankful that through the negotiation process, we delivered on that. It's the largest tax break for small business owners in state history. We're sending rebates to 460,000 additional working families. They'll literally get a check from the state between $300 and $1,300. Free lunches and free breakfasts for all K through 12 students. That helps working families. So that's what I really wanted to see. It wasn't just about taxing a certain number of people in our state. It's about where those revenues go and getting back to the people to make life more affordable. That was absolutely key to me.
Just the next steps. Are you're planning to sign the bill? Is my understanding?
Yes.
Do you anticipate a legal challenge?
Oh yeah.
You're confident, though. Do you think this is likely to hold up for the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be two more steps. There will be a court challenge for sure, which is appropriate, right? And that will be decided by our state Supreme Court. And undoubtedly, there will be a challenge in the court of public opinion, where the people will get to decide if they like this idea or if they don't like this idea. And that's also appropriate. The people should weigh in on something this important. And when it comes to the court case, I wouldn't be signing this unless I thought the chances were good that it would be upheld by the state Supreme Court. Like any legal challenge, it's complicated, but I think the legal arguments are strong to uphold it. And I feel the same way about the court of public opinion. I feel that the people are ready for this, and it's targeted, and dollars go back to small businesses and back to individuals, and I think that's why it'll be popular with the voters as well.
Can you talk a little about which economic strata this affects in terms of, if you're earning more than $1 million a year, but also if you're just scraping by, or if you're struggling somewhat in a middle class or middle income setting. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how the bill works for each of those?
Yeah, so the bill literally applies to 0.5% of Washingtonians, right? Like literally folks whose income totals more than $1 million in a year. So it's a very small number of people who'd be paying this income tax. That's number one. Number two, the important part is dollars to go back to individuals. So literally, if you're a small business owner, thousands of those small businesses will no longer be paying the B&O tax at all, right? They'll be exempted from it. We add nearly 500,000 working families who receive a check, a rebate from the state of Washington. So if your take-home income, for example, if you're a family of four, is under $100,000, you'll be getting that check from the state of Washington. These are all the kind of things I really wanted to see in there. The free meals, breakfast and lunch for all K through 12 kids across our state. That is a popular feature for people all across our state. So that's how this works, right? It's not just about more money for our general fund. That's nice to have, but it's about reinvesting back to the people to make sure that life is more affordable for them here in Washington state.
So I know this is still very early in the process. This bill is not even signed yet, but you've also said that you do not support lowering the threshold.
Correct.
That's a frequent refrain from critics of this proposal.
Sure.
So in a year or 2 years, if you're delivered a bill and it would lower that threshold below where it is today, would you sign it?
Yeah, I've been clear on that I oppose lowering it, and it shows the weakness in the opponents, right? I watch much of the floor debate. The weakness of their argument is be afraid of something that's not actually in the bill. okay? The bill has it as a millionaire's tax, and it goes up for inflation every single year, right? The amount of who pays it, right, to address that as well. So my feeling is someone's got a weak argument when their main argument is something that's not actually in the bill. Be afraid of something that could happen sometime in the future. I don't think that's going to happen in the future. I would oppose that. I've made that clear publicly many times. And that's another reason why I think that this will be successful at the polls, when the biggest argument against it is, again, something that's not even in the legislation.
Apart from that tax proposal, there were policy discussions, there were some changes, there was a budget shortfall, and can you give me your thoughts about other aspects of the session?
I mean, from my standpoint, despite the challenges we had, in terms of the priorities that I laid out in my State of the State address 2 months ago, the legislature delivered on virtually all of those. So I emphasized, when we were chatting a couple months ago, the need to invest in more housing, to make more housing affordable for more Washingtonians. I proposed a record investment in building more housing, and the legislature has met that, and I'm deeply appreciative. I'm going to be signing multiple bills that make it a more streamlined process to build more affordable housing. The legislature has done that as well. When it comes to our infrastructure, we talked about our roads and bridges that are in strong disrepair and need a focused investment. I proposed a record investment in our infrastructure. I'm super excited the legislature met that as well. So on all the issues I laid out in my State of the State address, I'm super excited that the legislature has really met those every step of the way. So from my perspective, as challenging as the session was, I feel that the priorities I laid out to make sure things are more affordable for Washingtonians, we build more housing, we address our infrastructure needs, virtually every one of those I talked about in my State of the State, the legislature adopted.
If we could talk a little bit about the budget outlook, there was some good news in terms of the economic revenue forecast during the session.
Yes.
How did that change the budget discussion, and how does that affect your plans for next year?
It certainly helped. I mean, as you know, when I had to propose my budget, without getting too much in the weeds for your viewers, I had to work off what our projections were for revenue. And another projection came out once the session started that showed an increase in available funds for the legislature to work with. So to your question, that obviously made their job a little bit easier, right? Still a challenge, but they simply had more dollars to work with than I had when I made my proposal. So I don't think there's any question that that additional revenue helped. That said, we're certainly not out of the woods when it comes to challenges we have. And as soon as this session wraps up, I'll be getting to work on my proposal for a budget for the next couple of years. And so we just need to make sure we're doing everything we can to make life more affordable for Washingtonians, but being very vigilant with our budget and being responsible with our budgeting.
Are there any policy bills or policy changes that stand out to you as wins from the session?
There's many. I mentioned the housing legislation, which is fantastic, but I will say in my State of the State address, when I laid out a number of bills that I thought were especially important, I talked about a couple that deal with the threats we have from the federal government, and I highlighted a couple bills there that both are coming my way to be signed into law. One was a bill that says that ICE agents cannot wear masks, for example. I highlighted that at some length in my State of the State address. I'm excited that bill passed the House and the Senate and looking forward to signing that. I think it's outrageous that we have ICE agents in unmarked cars who are masked plucking people off our streets. That's outrageous, and this bill addresses that. And number two, on the public health side, back in Washington, D.C. with Robert Kennedy Jr., they're all now into science denying, firing people who believe in science, who are involved in organizations like the CDC, who give guidance to the people all across the country for vaccine schedules, for example. So I formed a West Coast Health Alliance with governors from the West Coast to separate ourselves in Washington State from that science denying advice back in D.C., and we had a bill this session with Patty Cooter, our insurance commissioner, to follow through on that, to disconnect us from D.C. so we can go our own way here in Washington State and make sure the people have advice from experts based on science for their health and vaccine schedules. So really excited that bill passed as well.
Anything that hasn't gotten enough attention this session that you think maybe deserves a little more spotlight?
Great question. I think what I would say is, there's always many, right? But I know that sort of the one exception to, I think, the issues I laid out in my State of the State address that did not happen, that I was disappointed by, was an investment in ferries. That was the one thing I think that I highlighted when I look back at my State of the State address this morning, that I highlighted that was not in the budget. And I understand that. There's lots of competing priorities. But I really do believe we're making progress on addressing the crisis with our ferry system, but we can only continue making progress if we continue to invest in the new ferries that we need. So I'll definitely be coming back next session when I propose my budget with an emphasis on investments in ferries. That's the one thing that didn't get through the session that I'll be back again to try next year.
So you've basically answered this next question already, but in a different way.
Yeah.
If you were to grade the legislative session, is it a success, scale A to F?
Yeah. I'm not a teacher. My mom was, but I'm not. So I'm not sure I'm going to give a grade. But what I would say is the legislature in a short session, which is always difficult, as you know. It was a short session, faced a budget shortfall, faced significant threats from the Trump administration, but also faced some real opportunities, right? A millionaire's tax to make our tax system less regressive and invest back in the people. Investments in housing, investments in infrastructure. We also had historic opportunities. And what I would say is, by any fair measure, the legislature really met the moment. They've made those investments at historic levels in housing and infrastructure. We adopted the millionaire's tax, and we're balancing our budget in a way that I think will be responsible. So I think by any fair measure, this has been a very successful session, and one that, from my perspective and the priorities I laid out in my State of the State address, they met virtually every single one of them. So I'm really excited about the session and appreciate the hard work of the legislators. I mean, they're working extremely long hours. It's not easy to try and get this done on time, and just really appreciate their work and the cooperation we had this session.
Anything we missed?
I think you got it.
Okay, well, that will wrap us up for now. That was Governor Bob Ferguson. Stay with us. We are scheduled to speak with the Senate Majority Leader next after a break. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you.
Thank you, Governor.
Yeah, no, appreciate it.
Our state's been blessed with some incredible artists, and one of them was Kenneth Callahan. He grew out of the commonly called Northwest School in the 1930s. He and people like Morris Graves and William Cummings and Mark Tobey and others were known for their incredible artwork. They were broke, they were poor, they were struggling. They weren't having an easy time. But in the 1930s, the WPA came along and hired a number of artists to do some beautiful murals. And today you can see them all around the Pacific Northwest that were done as part of a government-sponsored art project. Kenneth Callahan's art changed over the years. He was very involved with the Seattle Art Museum, and then he moved as he retired out to the beach in Long Beach Peninsula. I remember we took our little son George out to see him a couple times, and he would take George by the hand and walk down the beach. And George was only 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6. And Kenneth would explain to him the motions in the sand and the motions in the sky and how they were similar. And my wife and I prayed that George would remember this someday, and I think he has. It was a life-changing experience in so many ways, an appreciation of art by this incredible man. When the Marine Hospital was built in Seattle, they wanted an artist to do the murals in the lobby. And they hired in a WPA project, Kenneth Callahan. And he did murals about the working men on the ship, lifeboat drills and loading cargo. And those murals were lost for a while, they were gone for a while, they were back in the hands of the city and the museums. But now, thanks to the Birkenfeld Foundation, they've been all restored and they're back in their rightful and original location, the Pacific Medical Center. The Pacific Medical Center, and especially in the lobby where these murals are located, is truly one of my favorite places.
Hi, my name is Drew Mantha, and I'm from Sammamish, Washington. I'm interested in the integration of a train system into Washington State. Other areas in the country have shown that inner-city passenger rail can be financially viable without full public subsidy. Washington State has a major population corridors, such as the I-5 from Seattle to Vancouver, BC, that face severe highway congestion. What is your position on attracting private investment or public-private partnerships to develop inner-city rail in Washington, and what do you see as the biggest barrier? Funding, land acquisition, or political will?
That's such a great question, Ruv. We absolutely need more transportation options for Washingtonians, and we've got to reduce our climate emissions and make our air quality better, and high-speed rail's a wonderful way to do that. I've had a chance to visit high-speed rail systems in Spain, in France, in Germany.
I love the Code Reviser.
The Code Reviser is great. I'm going unbuttoned. I think that's better. But you do whatever. Yeah, I think
you do you.
Well, I appreciate the question. It's a question we've looked at on numerous occasions, particularly in regards to high-speed rail.
They're going to count us in. It'll be about 20 seconds. There's this. And I have a short introduction on the screen. Standing by.
Are we live?
Yeah, we will be for this one.
And then it'll be recorded, too.
Yes.
On an endless loop for the next 8 months.
And we're up. And welcome to TVW's special coverage of the final day of the 2026 legislative session. I'm joined by the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Jamie Pedersen. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.
Looking back on the session, from your view, was it a success?
It was absolutely a success. You know, obviously, in every session, you don't get everything that you wanted, but I would say our number one priority was to pass the millionaire's tax, and we have done that. So that will help us with all of our main priorities this year, so it helps write our budget. It also helps by creating some more affordability for working families in the state, and it helps us have the resources to be able to continue pushing back against the Trump administration.
Some of your counterparts in the House have characterized this as a step towards an incremental process, or a step in an incremental process to making the tax code more fair. Do you see it that way?
It is absolutely another step in a long process that we've been on that involved work that Speaker Jinkins and I did now 14 years ago to try to overturn the series of initiatives that purported to require 2/3 majorities to increase taxes. The capital gains tax was another significant step in that direction. And now the millionaire's tax will make sure that we're addressing the upside-down tax code and have a fairer, more balanced system that provides adequate resources for us to do the services that people want from their state government.
You've been asked this before, but I have to ask again. What is your expectation if there's a legal challenge, assuming there's a legal challenge at the state Supreme Court, and then also if there's a ballot box repeal effort?
I assume absolutely that there will be an initiative to try to repeal it, and we look forward to that public conversation. We think that a majority of people in Washington are on our side and would like to see a fairer tax system that can fund public schools, fund health care, fund higher education, fund social services for people. And we also fully expect, part of the design of the measure is to require the Supreme Court to reconsider what I think was a cataclysmically bad ruling in 1933, saying that income taxes were property taxes.
Do you think that if you could actually kind of categorize how this legislation can help make the tax code less regressive by strata? And is there one, group of socioeconomic, is it the working poor, the people with the least who are just scraping by, or the middle class, or does it depend?
I would say our tax system requires the most of the people who are at the bottom of the economic spectrum, and it's a pretty simple reason why. It's because it depends 50% roughly on sales taxes, and those hit people at the bottom end of the economic spectrum the hardest. Every time you buy toothpaste, clothes, a car, any of those things, we're taking, call it 10% sales tax. Now only 6.5% of that is the state, but it adds up for folks. So it hits them the worst. It also hits middle class people a lot more proportionally. They spend more than twice as much by percentage of their income on state taxes, state and local taxes, as the folks in the top 1% do.
Are there any future tax efforts, tax restructuring efforts that maybe you could hint at that we might see in a future session?
Yeah, I think the next big thing that I'd like to tackle while we're waiting for the court to go on is to look at the property tax system and try to figure out how to change that so that we could have different rates, for example, for commercial and residential properties, so that we could figure out potentially how to have a significant homestead exemption for people. I think it's very clear that property taxes fall too heavily on, particularly folks on fixed incomes, but generally on residential property, and that's part of our housing crisis that we're struggling with. And I'll say, another really important thing that we did this year was a bill by Senator Deb Krishnadasan that is going to provide a significant expansion of the senior and disabled veteran property tax exemption program. So that'll mean a lot more people who are on fixed incomes who are going to get a significant break in their property taxes.
Beyond tax policy, there were police oversight bills. There were some surveillance guardrails put up related to law enforcement use of the license plate reader systems. What's your perspective on what passed, what didn't in that arena?
Yeah, so I think we made some really good, that was part of our general bucket about trying to push back against a federal government that seems to be out of control. We passed, obviously, the ban on law enforcement wearing masks while they're doing their work. That will be significantly helpful. We will now have among the most restrictive statutes in the country on the use of those automated license plate readers, protecting the privacy of people in Washington. So that's a significant benefit for us. And we've also passed really common sense legislation that just says that the same rules that apply to line officers, to sheriff's deputies and police officers are now going to apply to their bosses. They have to have that certification from the Criminal Justice Training Commission to do their job.
Opponents of that legislation argue that this circumvents the will of the voters because it empowers a board of largely non-elected individuals to potentially decertify a sheriff in particular, because chiefs, marshals...
Yeah, I mean, so that what it reminds me of, years ago we had one of my House colleagues, Representative Mike Hope, who moved out of his district. And once they found that out, he was no longer constitutionally qualified to serve as the state representative from the 10th district. So then, have you disempowered the voters of the 10th district? Because then the PCOs choose a replacement in the county council, and then in the next election, the voters get to decide if they want to keep that person or elect someone else. I mean, it's the same thing. There's a lot of really bad misinformation about this bill. The voters are always going to retain the right to choose their sheriffs. The question is, if the sheriff is no longer qualified because the sheriff has been decertified, then there's an appointment process in the interim, and then the voters choose a new sheriff. That is not taking away the right from the voters.
What bills or policy discussions didn't get enough attention this year?
I think the thing that we didn't really have the time to tackle, from my perspective, most important is really education funding, and that's big work that will be back for us next year. Now, partly it's about time and short session, partly it's about the money and not having enough money to do anything meaningful. But we have a real conversation to have about making sure that the significant dollars that we put into public schools follow the students who need those dollars the most. And so I look forward to that. I guess I'll also say along those same lines that we made a little bit of progress on cell phones, but it really would be a good idea for us to keep kids away from their cell phones during the entire school day.
Just lastly, what can we expect to see? You hinted maybe education funding in the next legislative session. What might be a big topic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think education funding always is. We won't have solved our housing problems between now and then, so I suspect we'll be back to working on trying to increase housing supply and protect people in the meantime. And then I think healthcare is a dramatic challenge for us, given what the federal government has done in terms of destabilizing the entire healthcare system. So I would say those would be right at the top of the list for next session.
Well, we will have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Again, we do appreciate your time. That is Democratic Senate Majority Leader Jamie Pedersen. After the break, we will hear a Senate Republican perspective. Stay with us. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Good to see you.
Appreciate it. Good to see you.
Lilacs all through the yard. And then disaster struck. After the war, the Vanport flood did a terrible amount of devastation along the river. She was lucky her house was saved, big trees were still in the yard, but all the lilacs washed away in the flood. But her friends came to the rescue. They called her up and they said, Hilda, we bought one from you 20 years ago and we're bringing it back, or we'll do a cutting for you, or we've got this variety or that variety. And she started again to create this lilac gardens. She lived to be nearly 100 years old. And after she died, associates and friends in the garden club took it over, and today it's one of our state's nicest attractions. Go there when the lilacs are blooming, because it is something to see and to smell and to behold. Hilda Klager Lilac Gardens, one of my favorite places.
As I've told you, I think, or if I didn't, I meant to, it's very rare for a bill to be introduced and stay unchanged all the way through the process. Much more common is for a bill to be changed, and the word for changing is amending. What is an amendment? Well, I told you that a bill is a wannabe law. An amendment is a wannabe part of a bill. It is a change to a bill. It could be small or it could be big. Typically, they will have taken all the amendments and put them into one big amendment, a striker or a substitute. And that is where we replace the entire language of a bill. Say it with me. The entire language gets replaced. In the case of a striker, it gets stricken. We strike everything that's written there and we put this new thing in. It is done for the convenience of the members because all these changes get confusing, so they just substitute the whole bill if they want. And often, I find that people get very confused by the terms. Don't worry about the terms. It's just a change to the document. For your purposes, what you want to do is look at the bill. If there's any changes to a bill, they'll be there. So make sure you've got the most recent version, but don't get hung up by striker and substitute and line and page and all of that. Just know that these are all terms for changes. They're all forms of an amendment. An amendment is just a wannabe part of a bill, and a bill is just a wannabe law.
Here in the beautiful Methow Valley, nestled near the banks of the Chewak River, is the little village of Winthrop. It's an incredible place.
Of course.
Now we won't. Or I could stop and run in and vote and come back. I did that on an interview last week.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It actually worked out pretty well.
That is pretty cool.
You get to 6
Sorry, I want to hear the end of that story, but
It didn't
maybe we'll get to it in a
exist.
second.
But as that road came closer and closer, the people in this town got busy.
And you are watching TVW's Sine Die special. We are live inside the legislative building. I'm joined by the Senate Republican leader, John Braun. Senator Braun, thank you for your time today. Just to start us off here, if you look at the session, if you were going to rate it, would you rate it a success?
I would not. I think they just last night passed arguably the most impactful bill in the last several decades, maybe in the last 100 years, in putting an income tax bill in front of the governor to sign. It looks like he'll sign it, and I think the long-term impact to our economy and to our standard of living here in Washington will be negative and almost be irreversible. We'll see. I mean, there's a few things that will have to play out. There'll likely be a court challenge, and there may be an initiative, but I just think this is headed in absolutely the wrong direction for the state of Washington.
Let's go back to the potential or expected court challenge, the potential ballot initiative. How do you see those playing out if you had to predict?
Well, I think, there's a number of organizations, one of them, or maybe they'll work together. I think there'll almost certainly be a legal challenge. And if the state Supreme Court, cares about the state constitution, that should be the end of it. It couldn't be more clear. Property is everything owned, tangible and intangible. It's hard to get to the conclusion that somehow income isn't property, and if income is property, the Constitution doesn't allow a graduated income tax. That said, I'm not convinced that's the answer they'll reach, but that'll play out over the next probably year or two. And then I think the initiative is a bigger question. Whether that's something that folks push for sooner versus later, I just don't know. I mean, what the Democrats were successful in doing, I think, to the harm of our state, is prohibiting a referendum. If they really care about what the people of Washington say, putting the question to them just like it is to the legislature in the form of a referendum, where no gets rid of the tax and yes keeps the tax, is the right way to do that. They chose to make it complicated for the voters by allowing the only path to be an initiative. That means yes is no and no is yes, and I think that's going to add confusion, and I think that will affect how people think about and whether it happens and when it happens.
Democratic supporters of the proposal argue that it's making the state's tax code more fair. They say it helps the working poor, the people at the bottom, and then also through the business tax breaks, the B&O tax breaks, helps middle-class families as well. What's your take?
Oh, I think they're wrong. I mean, let's just be plain. First of all, it's an income tax with a high threshold. In fact, and they call it, a millionaire's tax, but the truth is it's a $500,000 tax if you're married today. It has a marriage penalty in it, built into it, for reasons that make no policy sense whatsoever. They increase the deduction by inflation every 2 years instead of 1 year. And that's not 2 years of inflation. They use 1 year of inflation for every 2 years chronologically, which means over time, you can map it out. It means more and more people get affected by as inflation goes on, more and more people get pulled into this tax if nothing happens. And of course, they've left the door wide open. If approved by the U.S. or the state Supreme Court as constitutional, there's nothing to prevent them from coming back and lowering that threshold, increasing the rate. This will be on the books. And every example in our country, in our nation's history, says an income tax, once put on the books, will expand in every direction, both in rate and more people.
In terms of the budget beyond this tax policy, what are your thoughts about how that was settled, coming into it with a shortfall, getting better than expected revenue projections midway through?
Yeah, I think, again, and this I think is maybe even a bigger problem than income tax. Not only have they passed an income tax, which I think is wildly wrong for our state, they have set the stage for enormous deficits in the future with the operating budget they want to pass today. And that's, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but the gist of it is, we're bringing in $75 billion, they spend $80 billion. They do that by rating the rainy day fund, by rating the rainy day revenue coming into the fund, by doing a couple other budget tricks to make that balance in the 2 years that are really setting us up for next year. And then they have a growth curve in the second biennium that's, I think, 2.2%. When they've averaged 15%. That means if they don't wildly reduce their spending, and they've shown no inclination to do that in the last 9 years they've been in full control of the legislature, we're going to have deficits somewhere between $5 billion and $10 billion. And what happens then? They come back for a third year in a row with record tax increases. They increase increase the income tax, which we've talked about over and over, the wealth tax, the payroll tax. This is absolutely setting ourselves up for more and more deficits, and that so far the Democrats have insisted on solving that with more and more taxes. I think it's shoving us almost certainly into a downward spiral for our state's economy.
Let's transition to policy bills. Are there any policy bill wins from this session?
Well, I mean, we'll see what happens today. I think one of the things that I don't think it's an even trade, but the one win, if it passes today, is the estate tax. They recognized, last year we went from the highest in the country at 20% to the highest in the country by a big margin at 35%. And we've seen, capital fleeing from our state. And I know the other side of the aisle, they go, oh, it's not really happening, but they know it's happening. Their own supporters are making a decision, to move out of the state. Nick Hanauer, who's been their champion forever, no longer lives in the state of Washington. So they know this is a bad thing, and they've decided to undo it and take it back to a mere 20%, still the highest in the country, but better than it was for the last year. So I'd say that's a win if it happens. It hasn't finished yet. It just came back from the House last night, and we'll see if the Democrats in the Senate bring it up for a vote. But if they do, that's a small win. I think the bigger wins are bills that we have stopped this year. The bills like the ag unionization bill, which would have been a death nail for an ag sector that's already having a super hard time here in the state of Washington. The environmental crimes bill that left the Senate but died in the House would have been a killer for any type of construction, especially large construction. Think power generation or transmission generation. The risks of building anything under that bill would have been extreme. I think it would have brought frankly our limited construction in the state of Washington to a screeching halt. So those are a couple wins. There's more, but I know there's a lot of things to talk about today.
So relating to artificial intelligence, there were just a slew of proposals aimed at different aspects of AI. AI in pricing, AI in decision-making, and chatbots. What's your perspective on state efforts to get in front of AI?
So my perspective is one, I think AI is important for our state and our country, but we need to make sure we're careful how it develops. I think broadly, restrictions on AI are best at the national level. The exception I would make to that is where, it's obvious that immediate harm could be done. And we've passed some bills like that where, AI could be misused to harm children as an example. We should get after that quickly. And I think by and large, we have, and we should keep our eyes open where it's being misused and it's hurting people directly. The state should not be, hesitant about wading in. Where it's broader regulatory and framework for the development of AI, I think we're probably better at a national framework and give our country the best chance to lead in this area around the world.
Are there any issues that you really expect to see next legislative session? Issues that you want to see or issues that you just expect to see?
Well, issues I expect to. I think this budget issue we've had as a result of years of overspending is coming back to us. I see no real move by the Democratic legislators or the governor to get our house in order when it comes to executing on services that our citizens need. We still have significant and I think credible allegations of fraud in some parts of our government. I'm not saying they're true. I just think that we got to get after them. We have to figure out whether they're true, and if they're true, there should be consequences. If they're not true, the public deserves to know so we can kind of rebuild trust in state government. So those are two things. Broadly, I think we have to finally, in a real way, get after the things that are holding back our economy, particularly our housing economy. We've nibbled around the edges to help build more housing, but we haven't really dove into the hard things. Energy code, consistent and buildable, new access to new lands through the Growth Management Act, planning through the Growth Management Act. Those are things that we got a lot of work to do, and I'm hopeful that my Democratic colleagues will finally see that little bites around the edges aren't solving the problem, that we're failing on housing, and we're going to have to be more aggressive if we're going to get the job done.
Well, we're almost out of time. Any closing thoughts?
Well, I thank you as always for inviting me here. The work that TVW does for our state is valuable, and I appreciate all the work. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and serve in our state's capital.
Thank you very much. Senate Republican leader John Braun joining me here. After a short break, we'll see Democratic House Speaker Lori Jinkins. Stay with us.
Electricity now. So I think you have to look at all of those things before you can really determine how we're going to go forward in addressing our greenhouse gas emissions with the public transit that we have today.
Hey, Cora, that's a great question. We absolutely have to do more to reduce transportation greenhouse gas emissions. In most years, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and you know and I know that we can do better. Our transit systems are one critical part of the solution by helping people move more efficiently. And if you're in the central Puget Sound, if you're in Seattle, you know that light rail is completely carbon-free. The electricity it uses is carbon-free, and it's a great way to move around while reducing our emissions. I love the idea of green streets. The details of that are more things that our local governments, our cities and our counties will consider. The state is predominantly a funding partner in helping advance these kinds of initiatives. I've had a chance to see some of these amazing transit systems around the world that include that green infrastructure and those green streets. I think that's a wonderful vision here, and we need to work with folks like the new Seattle mayor and the Seattle City Council, other decision makers locally, to build the vision from the ground up to make those kind of investments. A great question. Thanks for bringing it up, and let's get it done.
One of the questions I get asked the most is, hey Mike, how come our system of government, and passing a bill in particular, is so complicated? And the answer is because the people that founded our system of government were suspicious of government, and they wanted to make it difficult to enact the law. Remember, they had just fought a war against a king. Well, you don't remember, but you probably heard about it, right? They fought a war against a king, and they established this new system of government, a system of government that was purposefully complex, meaning it's difficult to pass a law. And the idea was to have three separate but co-equal branches of government: the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. The legislative, which is going to be the primary focus of these videos, makes and passes the laws. The executive implements and enforces the laws, and the judiciary interprets the laws. But the main one we're going to talk about is the legislative process. And again, it is a process. It's complex on purpose. It was done to make it difficult to pass a law and also to make sure that we get it right. These are important things. They're going to be the laws that govern all kinds of people, you, me, everybody. We want to make sure it's written as well as it can be written. So each of these steps that we're going to go through is an opportunity for more eyes to be on it and get it right. Everything from typos, and yes, I've seen typos all the way through, it happens, to changes to the law, to more people getting to talk about it, which is an important part of it, to new groups of legislators who hadn't seen it before getting a chance to see it. It's also making sure that you and other members of the public get a chance to see it and comment on it, because that's very important. Each of these steps accomplishes that, so that by the end, hopefully the final product is as good as we can make it be. It doesn't necessarily mean everybody loves it. It doesn't even necessarily mean that it accomplishes everybody's political aims. But it's a compromise product, and it's at least as good as we can make it technically, if not always politically. And that's an important point. You've got to get it right. When they're done with their work, it's got to go over to the executive. The executive's got to understand it and know what he or she is supposed to do with it. It's not just the governor, it's all kinds of agencies. They need to be able to read it, understand what they're supposed to do, and do it. And in those instances where they're not sure what they're supposed to be doing, or they're not sure what the law means, or somebody else thinks they're unsure about the law, that's where the judiciary comes in. You have the ability to go in front of a court and say, hey, I don't know what this law means, or I don't think that the agency or the executive is interpreting this right, or sometimes I don't think the legislature had the power to pass this in the first place. And the court looks at all of that and makes a ruling. And that's basically how the three sort of work together and keep a check and a balance on each other. Legislature passes it, the executive implements it, and the judiciary says whether they can do it in the first place and what the limits of that law are. And if there's ambiguity, what do those terms mean?
Here we are in the beautiful Lake Quinault Lodge on the shores of Lake Quinault in Grace Harbor County. This beautiful building was constructed in 1926 in less than 53 days. And it's been accommodating visitors from all over the world ever since. It's a joy and a delight to come here and stay. Night times in front of the fireplace, daytimes fishing on the lake. Just one of those wonderful places that we enjoy here in Washington State. What an incredible place in this valley of the biggest trees in the world. It's been a mecca for people wanting to get away from it all and enjoy the...
Yes, sir. Are you ready, Speaker Jinkins?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And welcome to TVW's Sine Die special coverage. With me now is House Speaker Lori Jinkins. Speaker Jinkins, thank you for your time on a very eventful 60-day session. One of the bills that got the most attention relates to the 9.9% tax on income above $1 million a year. What's your perspective on where that legislation landed?
I think we spent the entire session, a lot of the interim, and the entire session working to perfect that bill, and I think we did a really good job. Personally, our goal was to pass a bill that gives tax relief to Washingtonians and also invests in services for Washingtonians, and that's what the bill does. If you look at it, every day Washingtonians who go into the grocery store, nearly everything that they would regularly buy in the grocery store is now going to be tax-free. Diapers, over-the-counter drugs, hygiene products, things that had before had a sales tax on them will no longer have that. We also were really concerned about our small businesses. 59% of our businesses, mostly small businesses, it's 225,000 businesses almost, will pay no business and operations taxes anymore. So that will really help our small business community. Free school lunches are a big cost for families. Breakfast, lunch. Now families aren't going to there's no family in Washington that's going to have to worry about how they're going to get their child's school lunch or send them to school to learn with a full belly, because we'll be providing that as a state. So I think these are great things that the tax does in terms of affordability, and there's only a little bit over 20,000 Washingtonians that are going to pay it, which is less than half of 1%. So I think we hit a really great balance on this bill and appreciate all the work that the Senate, the House members, and the governor did to make sure that we could work through all the issues and get it done for the people.
So there was a different proposal that would have ended sales tax on prepared food, so fast food, certain types of items in a grocery store. The state is heavily reliant on sales tax currently, and I'm wondering if there are any other areas for tax restructuring that might be on the menu, so to speak, during the next legislative session. I know there were some big changes made this year.
Yeah, well, I think there's always there are always ideas about tax restructuring and we have been working on those this is my 16th year in the legislature. We have done many things in that realm. So I think that we will continue to work on that. There will be a lot of proposals that come forward, and there are every year. And we'll just have to see over the interim how people work on things, what we hear from folks, and what we think that we can do to continue restructuring our tax code to make it more fair to everyone in the state.
So it's been a late couple of nights for legislators here, and there is still negotiation underway today. What are the big ticket items or any tricky legislation that still got to move through the process in the final hours?
We've moved most of our big bills forward. There are some bills that we still have to pass on or concur with on either side that are what's called necessary to implement the budget, so they're presumed to be in the budget, so we have to make sure that those get passed in order to have our budget balance in the end. And then we have all three budgets to pass today. Those have all been agreed to by the House and Senate and are on the bar for people to review. So I think I'm feeling pretty good about our ability to make progress.
There was good news from the Economic Revenue Forecast Council early in the session, and it came on the heels of successive bad reports in previous quarters. How did that change the budget outlook, and do you think that the current budget will be sustainable, or will there need to be adjustments made in the next biennium?
Well, I think that we have a 4-year outlook, so we look into the future when we pass our budget. It's a little bit challenging to do that. We're the only state that has a requirement for this, and partly other states don't do it because they recognize how difficult it is to predict revenues and expenses in a 4-year time period, especially with this current administration where we have tariffs hitting us really hard, especially in this state. It's very hard to do that, but I would say our budget projected out balances over 4 years. and we believe that it balances into the future. Now, the thing that will have the biggest effect on next year's budget will actually be what other harm the federal administration decides it's going to do to Washingtonians. The implementation of H.R. 1 and all of the health care cuts are coming actually next year, not this year, the end of this year. The tariffs and their impact, we see the tariffs right now having huge impacts on jobs in Washington State, and I think that's something that we're really going to have to look at a package to help Washingtonians in the job arena next year. So we will definitely have our work cut out for us, but one of our priorities was this year to make sure that we could do all the things possible to stem the tide of the harm that the federal government was sending. We did a lot of work around that, and we will continue to do that work as long as this administration decides that it's going to be fairly aggressive in harming people in this state and others.
If we could talk a little bit about the negotiation, the compromises along the way for the Senate Bill 6346, the major tax code change this year. Initially, there was public defense funding for cities and counties. At some point, that got swapped, stripped out, and so that's no longer there. Just from that perspective, can you talk about how those decisions came to be, how tricky they were, and also, if you have any ideas or thoughts about it, what's next for public defense?
Well, I think you will see in both the Millionaire's Tax Bill and the budget is a commitment to $200 million of the revenue that we get from that bill going to local governments. It will go to local governments in a flexible way rather than just listing that it must be for indigent defense. So local governments will be able to spend that money on indigent defense if they decide to do that, but they will have more flexibility than just being instructed that the money can just go for one thing. So that will be an opportunity for local governments to decide how they prioritize, knowing that the state Supreme Court has required that we lower the ratio of cases that every attorney who's doing indigent defense has.
There were a lot of bills that had artificial intelligence somewhere in the body of the word, or in the sometimes the headline. What's your perspective on issues that complicated and just the discussion about how to regulate that at the state level?
Yeah, I think it still remains a fairly complex issue for us to struggle with. I think generally members on both sides of the aisle think that AI is a useful thing, and it can also be a very dangerous thing. So figuring out how you walk that line is the challenge that we have. I'm very pleased that Representative Shavers, who's been working on this issue and leading on this issue, got his bill 1170 through, which I think starts to set a framework for us on how we regulate AI in Washington State. We also had a Lisa Callan bill that regulates chat bots. And we see that those are especially damaging to our youth. So making sure that we've entered into that arena. This will not be the last thing we do, but we've now got, I think, an excellent framework to continue moving forward in future sessions.
What do you expect to dominate the next legislative session? Maybe hard to predict. I mean, the current session isn't over. What do you see as likely topics?
Well, I want to just say again, Mike, that it's hard to know what's going to dominate the next session because what the federal administration has done really dominated this session and what they've done was not predictable to us. So a lot of it is going to depend on what the federal administration does, how we need to react to it. We have not yet had the federal administration do anything that was in partnership with the state of Washington or states generally. Everything they've done so far has been quite hostile. So I think we are expecting that we're going to have to react to things like that. I think that one of the most important things that we'll work on over the interim, as we have seen tariffs and the inflation caused by tariffs and the slowdown in construction and things like that and our ports as a result of tariffs, that has really harmed jobs, especially in our building and construction trades. And we are going to have to really look at over the interim how we build a strong jobs package for the people of the state of Washington to make sure, again, that we can figure out a way to navigate the harm that's being done by the federal government.
We will have to leave it there. Thank you very much. That's Democratic House Speaker Lori Jinkins, and thank you for joining us. After the break, we'll hear from the House Republican leader. Stay with us. Thank you very much for your time.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Favorite places.
For 20 years, I stood in front of classrooms full of 14-year-olds, trying to show them that government isn't something distant, but instead something that shapes their daily lives. TVW was my lifeline. It pulled back the curtain and showed my students the real people, real decisions, and real processes that make our state work. Now, being a part of TVW, I get to help other teachers give their students that same spark of understanding and empowerment. Civic education has never mattered more. People are searching for a place they can trust, where they can see their government honestly, openly, and without spin. When we understand how our democracy works, we understand our place in it. TVW gives every Washingtonian that chance. It equips teachers, students, and community members with the tools they need to feel informed, confident, and ready to participate in shaping the future of our state.
Here in this beautiful valley, which was once the location of the council grounds for the strongest Indian tribes east of the Cascades, is where the United States government established Fort Walla Walla many generations ago. They were fighting the Indian Wars in those days, and then it went on to become a staging point for World War I, a cemetery, a staging point for World War II, an integral part of the defenses for Eastern Washington. Today it's got a wonderful museum, agricultural exhibits, the picnic grounds, the historic village. They're all worth a visit. Since 1856, this beautiful cemetery has been the resting place for people who defended and fought for the United States. It's still an incredible place to visit, to pay your respects and think about those who gave their lives for our country. Today, it's a beautiful place to visit, pay your respects at the cemetery, to visit the museums, to see the antique agricultural exhibits, and to learn a lot about the history of this valley. I truly love this location, and it's one of my favorite places.
And welcome to TVW's special coverage of Sine Die, the final day of the 2026 legislative session. I'm joined now by House Republican leader Drew Stokesbary. Thank you so much for your time today. You guys have had a couple of late nights, you're probably exhausted, but if you had to give the session a grade or rate the session overall, how would you rate it?
Unfortunately, not very well. I mean, I think Republicans had a lot of successes relative to our minority status. I think we stopped a lot of bad bills. There was a number of bills the majority introduced throughout session that would have made life even more expensive for struggling Washington families, would have made our communities less safe. I think we're pretty proud as Republicans to have stopped a lot of those bills, but the legislature still passed a lot of other troubling bills. Probably the biggest one is a state income tax. It applies to folks earning over $1 million today, but Democrats voted down attempts to put that on the ballot as a referendum to let the people figure out what they want, and also voted down attempts to put that $1 million in the Constitution. So at any point in the future, the legislature, by a simple majority vote, could change that threshold, and Republicans believe that an income tax on anyone today is going to turn into an income tax on everyone tomorrow. So in that regard, it was kind of disappointing to see that happen. And so a widely expected legal challenge is that's what everyone thinks is going to happen here. How do you see that playing out? You know, if the Supreme Court follows the law and follows the Constitution and calls balls and strikes, this is one of the easiest cases that ever happened, that you'll ever see. I'm a lawyer by trade. Lawyers have this joke that anytime somebody asks us a question, the answer is always the same, that it depends. Well, this is one of the very few legal questions where the answer shouldn't really be that difficult. The Constitution is very clear. Property taxes must be uniform, limited to a rate of 1% or less. And it's obvious from the plain meaning of the word that income is a type of property. If income isn't your property, then whose property is it? We certainly don't think it's the government's. So I think it's very clear that income is property. That's what the Supreme Court said in 1933. If they apply the law fairly and equally, that's what they should say in 2026. And if that's what they do, then it's an easy case, and the tax will be overturned as unconstitutional. Supporters of the proposal argue that it makes the tax code more fair. They say it helps families in the middle and in the lower socioeconomic arena to try to do a little better, a little relief, small business owners. Yeah. Is that fair? No, it's not. There's not really any relief, and any relief there is what the Senate Majority Leader would call a pie crust promise. There's no reduction no meaningful reduction in taxes for those on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. If you're struggling to make ends meet right now, if you're looking at the rising price of gas and groceries and housing and childcare, and you're living paycheck to paycheck, how is your life better just because some rich guy in Bellevue has to write a check to the State Department of Revenue? It's not. The bill did absolutely nothing to relieve the tax burden on the lower and middle class, on working Washingtonians, and that was a huge missed opportunity. The small things in the bill are easily gotten rid of in the future. There's a provision for free lunches for kids, but we've seen what happens around here. A program gets funded for a year or two, and then folks' priorities shift, and it's no longer a priority anymore. So all in all, I think it's a really unfair deal for working families because they're not going to see really any benefit from this. So I want to get your take on the budgets that are still being discussed, but also one aspect of the budgets. A part of the original legislation for the new tax would have devoted a couple $100 million a year to cities and counties for public defense. That's no longer part of that bill. My understanding is there's money in the budget for that. What's your take? Yeah, I think that's true. The conference budget only came out about 24 hours ago, so I'm not sure I saw that specifically, but I understand that was the plan. Republicans have always said that we should be funding more public defenders. It's a necessary component of our criminal justice system, and if we want to get these violent offenders off the streets, we've got to give them a trial first, and they can't have a trial until they have a lawyer. So it's a necessary part of the system to keep our community safe, but Republicans have always thought that it's a high enough priority, we should just fund it within existing resources, that we don't need to go out and raise taxes on people to do something that's part of our basic constitutional duty. Were there any bipartisan wins from your perspective? A lot of times the capital budget's popular, a lot of times the transportation budget's popular. What's your take? Well, I think it's important to note that there is a bipartisan vote on the income tax. every Republican and a handful of Democrats joined up for a bipartisan rejection of that idea, and unfortunately, it still passed over that. Like you said, the capital budget I think is going to do a lot of good for our communities. I think the transportation budget will as well. We figured out a way to allow electric vehicle makers, Rivian and Lucid, to be able to sell directly to consumers here in Washington. That's been something we've been trying to navigate for a couple years, and we finally figured out a path forward for that. So there was a nice bipartisan vote on that last night as well.
Any other policy areas that jump out at you? There were other, AI, public safety.
Yeah, the legislature passed a bill to regulate AI chatbots, which I think was probably a good and necessary step. There were parts of the bill I didn't like, but I ended up voting for it, and overall I think struck a better balance than some of the other bills. For Washington being as having a reputation as such a tech-friendly and pro-tech state, we have a very anti-tech legislature. There's hardly anybody here. We're all part-time citizen legislators. We all have jobs outside of here. Hardly any of us have jobs in tech, though. And a lot of the policies that get proposed are kind of anti-technology. And so I think Republicans were pretty happy to see the most anti-technology, anti-progress bills get voted down. There was an Attorney General priority bill that would have regulated what sort of videos TikTok and Facebook and Instagram can show you, rather than showing you things based on what you're interested in. It would have to show everybody the same thing. We think that was pretty unwise and needlessly restrictive. There's a couple other bills that kind of did the same thing. There was a data center bill that would have made it really hard to keep building data centers in Washington State, which create a ton of jobs for us and make us a leader in the tech world. That bill died. So I think we were pleased that some of the most anti-tech legislation was not able to cross the finish line.
I want to ask you about data centers. There is this debate about how data centers, or if data centers, affect the price of electricity, just because they need so much of it in a given area. Is that a legitimate concern from your perspective?
It's a concern to the extent that it's a question worth asking. It's an important question, but I've talked to both the data centers, the power providers, and have walked away with a totally different understanding than I think what is often presented in the media. Data centers do use a lot of power, but they're not your normal customer that hooks up and pays the normal customer rates. They have special deals with utilities. Some of them pay an additional amount for the privilege of making sure they always have enough power. And that is extra money for the power company to reduce the pressure on rates for regular people like you and me. Other data centers don't pay for that, but they get power like you and I do, and they aren't guaranteed that they'll always have it. And so the structure actually, I think, is really good for consumers. It makes it so we do have enough power, and we do get it at the most affordable price. And I think sort of the sky is falling rhetoric is a little misguided. I think the better solution, rather than trying to limit data centers, is to figure out how we can expand our electrical grid. How do we invest in tomorrow's technology? We got to stop undoing the progress we've made with hydro. That's a great source for baseload. We got to then figure out how do we harness new technology, especially small modular nuclear. I think that will allow us to really go into the 21st, 22nd century and do a lot of good things here in Washington.
What policy or financial legislation do you anticipate House Republicans will emphasize or bring again in 2027?
We are going to continue to be laser focused on making Washington more affordable. The majority party wants to blame the other Washington for tariff policies driving up prices here in Washington. And as Republicans in this state, as conservatives, I don't really like tariffs either. But tariffs don't explain why this Washington is more expensive than pretty much every other state, and it doesn't explain why things that are totally unconnected to tariffs, like childcare, are so much more expensive here than other states. It is clearly this Washington's policies are making this Washington be more expensive than any other state, and legislative Republicans are going to be laser focused for the next year and beyond at getting those price increases under control so that regular people can afford to live in our great state.
What do you predict that the average family that may be watching this, in a year, 2 years from now, what will they look back and think about this session?
I think they're going to wonder if passing the income tax really is leading to a precipitous decline in Washington's prosperity. It's very easy. It's politically popular. It's in line with sort of the populism of the 2010s and 2020s to say, let's tax the rich. There is some merit into wanting to rebalance our tax code. And yes, those folks probably can pay taxes more easily. But those folks do a lot of other things than build giant swimming pools full of cash like Scrooge McDuck. They create jobs jobs, they build businesses. Yeah, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates have made a lot of money, more money than you and I can dream of. But they also created great companies that have changed the way regular people interact with the world and interact with each other. And they've hired tens of thousands of Washingtonians, and they've created prosperity for those people and for their families and their communities. And so I worry that driving those folks out of state will, not just hurt the millionaires themselves, but it's actually going to hurt regular people like you and me, because there's going to be less jobs in Washington. There's going to be less tax revenue to fund the other programs that we all believe in. And I think in the long run, it's really, really unwise economic policy. And in a couple of years, I think folks will start to realize it when jobs start to leave, when companies start to leave, and I think we'll really come to regret it.
We will leave it there. Thank you for your time. That's House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbary, and thank you for watching. Please stay with us. We have more to come after the break.
We see the exterior, which is beautiful Tenino sandstone from Thurston County, and the interior is all Alaskan marble. Some of the finest marble work I've ever seen. This marble came from Alaska as ballast in ships returning from the gold rush to Grays Harbor. The murals, the beautiful gas lamps have been electrified, and the incredible stained glass up in the dome. Today we see this courthouse as something that's protected and preserved by the people of Grays Harbor for all of us to enjoy. This building is almost beyond belief, and it truly is one of my favorite places. This is Fort Nisqually, just above the Tacoma Narrows in Pierce County. What a magnificent reproduction of our state's history, where the British flag still flies as a location of part of the Hudson Bay Company, as they built many forts and gardens and areas to really develop the land all across America. Most Washingtonians don't realize that once we were part of the British Empire. Everything north of the Columbia River was considered British, and it wasn't until the Treaty of 1846 that the boundary was set on the 49th parallel. The British fought over this territory, the U.S. wanted this territory, the Russians wanted this territory. Everybody wanted this area because of this pelt. This is the skin or the pelt of a beaver or sea otters. These were incredibly valuable in Asia and back in Britain. This fort was originally located down where the town of DuPont is now, but it was moved here during the CCC days, the days of our Depression in the 1930s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration had thousands of men that needed jobs, and this was an activity that they took up. They brought many of the buildings here, and the Park District is added to that, and now it's a living, vibrant history of Washington state life long before we were a state. This is a real educational location where kids can come, and they do by the hundreds. They see the various tools that were used. They experience what life was like in a fort in the 1840s and 1850s. They have reenactors that demonstrate the day-to-day activities. It's a wonderful place for education and a wonderful place for learning. Life was pretty simple in the 1830s, 1840s, but there were necessities. Early trappers and traders would come into the store here to buy beads to trade with the Indians, or perhaps playing cards to while away the evening hours, or an article of clothing that was needed. Fort Nisqually provided all the essentials, and this was a popular place. This is a Hudson Bay Company location, still in existence and one that we can still learn about. It truly is one of my favorite places.
Hi, my name is Einman, and I am a 10th grader from Nampavine, Washington. While researching behavioral health care in Washington State, I learned that long wait times, provider shortages, and limited youth mental health services continue to be major issues. What steps can the legislature take to improve access to timely and affordable behavioral health care, especially for young people and underserved communities?
Well, thanks for the question. There's no doubt in the legislature that behavioral health continues to need to be a focus of us, especially here in the Healthcare Committee. And you're exactly right. Lack of timely payments, lack of providers, and just the system overall has needed to be continued to work on. So some of the things that we have done in the legislature over the past couple of years is, one, we have worked towards ensuring timely payments for providers, specifically for behavioral health reimbursements. So that's House Bill 1432 that we worked on from last year. And, you know, where people are at in their behavioral health needs is not a monolith. So, you know, somebody accessing behavioral health as a youth in their school, for instance, is different than somebody that wasn't able to access timely behavioral health resources and becomes in a situation where they're in a place of crisis. So to address the crisis piece, I had been working with first responders, community groups on a bill that I did not sponsor, but Representative Nance did, House Bill 1811, that looks to continue to provide training and resources for workers out in the community, so when someone does go into crisis, you have immediate response from a behavioral health professional. What you see in the community now usually is a firefighter, police officer, emergency medical services, and while we're pretty good at what we do, would it not be better for someone in crisis to have an actually trained behavioral health co-responder that's able to respond in a more timely fashion than just having the fire department show up and take people to the hospital? That's not the best use of resources, and it's certainly not the best way to get people in crisis to the behavioral health resources that they need. You know, it's one of those things where, as society continues to change and evolve between advances in AI and smartphones and social media, you know, we really need to start to tackle and think strategically about behavioral health upstream and downstream, so that way, you know, some of those societal impacts and societal pressures aren't able to get to folks at a relatively young age, that they'll have the tools and resources they need to you know, be able to deal with you know, behavioral health issues if they have them, and make sure that they get timely treatment. So you're exactly correct. The legislature is working on these things, but we're going to continue to need to work on these things in the future. So thanks for the question.
Well, thank you for that question. Behavioral health is incredibly important, and it's a growing need in Washington State. What I have found, I talked to a lot of our behavioral health organizations, and staffing issues is a major challenge. As you might imagine, a lot of staff get burned out. It's a difficult job dealing with this. Obviously, dealing with a lot of stress and you know, difficult situations. And it's also not a highly paid profession. So, especially those who are in the Medicaid space, Medicaid doesn't pay a lot. And so there's a lot of turnover, and so that's unfortunate. I mean, some of the organizations I talk to are often run at 50% staffing, which means there's long wait times, hard for people to get in. Sometimes you have people who are ready for treatment, and then they can't get in to see a provider. That is really a travesty. So, you know, things we can do, we could work on increasing our Medicaid reimbursement rates so that so that there's a little more money in there to pay a fair wage. We also have training issues, and especially when you get around to psychiatrists and some of that, Washington is one of the most stringent states in the country to get a psychiatry license, with significantly more clinical hours required. So even if a Washington State student wants to become a psychiatrist and goes to school out of state, they often come back to Washington and find out they can't get their license because they don't have enough clinical hours. That's something that should be addressed. I've talked to the dean of psychiatry at University of Washington, and he acknowledges this is a problem. The problem is all the current psychiatrists had to go through this onerous process to get their license, and often they are not overly excited about making it easier for the up-and-comers to come into the profession. So that's something we need to address. We continue to work on streamlining things, reducing regulations where they're not necessary to improve the quality of life for people doing this work, and encouraging people to come into the profession, and making it a more respectable thing to do that makes people want to go into the profession. So there's a lot of things we can do, but it is not an easy solution. Thank you for the question.
Lots of places are known for timber or fish or some other product. Tenino's known for sandstone.
My name is Keith Phillips, and I'm the current stone cutter and carver at the Hercules Sandstone Quarry here in Tenino. Tenino has a long history of stone cutting. It was started with all the Europeans that came to this area and discovered the outcropping of stone and established 3 quarries, starting in 1889. It was a large stone cutting industrial site in 1912 that cut architectural stone. Tenino sandstone from this quarry and the other quarries in Tenino can be found in Seattle and Olympia and Tacoma and Portland, Walla Walla and Spokane and San Francisco and Montana and other places. The Tenino sandstone's blessings have risen and fallen over the years with the economic times and the building standards. Sandstone and structural stone was becoming a thing of the past in the 20s. Tenino operated into the 30s. This quarry operated into about 1938. Currently, we are cutting decorative stone in my operation. I came to Tenino to cut stone in 1989, and I will continue carving as long as I can. There is a future for Tenino sandstone. It's a matter of the economic times. The quarries have risen and fallen over the years. They've seen their glories and they've seen their downtimes. Times will continue, and there is a future for these stones.
It's fun to go there and see the quarries that are still in operation, and to know that they constructed from here so many buildings across the American West. An amazing place, one of my favorite places.
We are really in an AI race with China, and we need to make sure that we win this race. And the worry is that if state lawmakers, for specific interest at the state level, create environments that effectively become the de facto national standard, that you won't have that creative process that goes on. It's so critical that America win this race with China, and we continue to maintain this lead, because it is our national security that's at stake.
This is one of the hidden gems of our state of Washington, a location where a wide variety of organizations and groups of all kinds of ethnic and racial backgrounds have enjoyed one location together, a spot where they could come to see their favorite performer, or perhaps could come and listen to a lecture, or just enjoy a Sunday afternoon of dance and family gatherings and fellowship. This is a beautiful location located in one of the small valleys in the central area of Seattle. It's been here since 1908, and it truly is one of the gems of the state of Washington. Washington Hall became one of those locations in our state where any ethnic group or any racial background, no matter who you were, you could come and rent the location. Can you imagine if you were here the night that Jimi Hendrix made one of his first performances? Count Basie performed here, Billie Holiday was here, Marian Anderson, you go down the list. The Danish Brotherhood built this hall for the enjoyment of all. They used it as a lodge and a gathering place for dances and family activities, but so many other groups have as well. The Jewish community, the Scandinavian community, the Eastern European community, the Ethiopian and African community was owned for a while by the Sons of Haiti, then passed on to historic Seattle. And they've done a magnificent job to restore this location. It's a tribute to everyone who ever lived in the area or came here to watch a performance. All of us must express our appreciation for the restoration of Washington Hall. This truly is one of my favorite places.
Have you ever watched a floor debate and asked yourself, what the heck is going on?
Be advanced to third reading, second reading, considered the third, and the bill be placed on final passage.
Well, actually, it's a well-orchestrated affair, and with a little explanation, it's fairly easy to follow. So we went straight to the source, Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck, to explain.
So at the beginning of our floor session, we begin with ritual and ceremony, Pledge of Allegiance, invocation, presentation of flags, all really as a kind of a grace step to get ourselves organized for the actual debate and deliberation on legislation.
The first thing you'll notice is, in addition to the ceremonies, the members speak to each other in a very formal manner.
I'd also like to recognize the good senator from the 32nd for his assistance and guidance on this.
In order for debate to begin, members of the Senate will rise and say, Mr. President, and be recognized by the President, and then proceed with whatever points they want to make. So there are a lot of formalities associated with debating policies. There's a lot of decorum. That decorum is actually called for in our rules because according to the rules of the State Senate and the other chamber, the State House, there are certain things that members can and cannot say. They cannot impugn the motives of another member. They can't have their words become personal in the debate. Their remarks must relate to the merits and demerits, as they see it, of the pending policy.
Speaking directly to what the good member from the 4th just spoke to.
Probably the most important beyond the comportment ones, you can't call the other person or your opponent by names, is that your remarks actually have to be germane to that bill. You can't be speaking about another subject. You can't use it as an excuse to launch off into a debate about who knows what pet issue you have going on in the world today. Keep your remarks to the matter before the chamber.
Members follow strict procedural rules to ensure the debate is civil, on topic, and moves along in a timely fashion. Keep in mind, the House has their own rules, which are similar but also slightly different.
The ayes have it. The nominations are closed.
First off, The Senate follows an order of business from first to ninth order. Each order has a different purpose, but something to keep in mind is that although orders are laid out in numerical order, they often vote to conduct their business out of sequence.
Senator Riccelli.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I move the Senate advance to the fourth order of business. Then I move the Senate advance to the fifth order of business. Mr. President, I move the Senate revert to the seventh order of business. I move the Senate advance to the eighth order of business.
If this seems like a lot to pay attention to, it is. And that is why Lieutenant Governor Heck is accompanied by a rostrum full of staff.
The staff behind that rostrum that viewers will see during a debate, that's really the engine behind this place. One way to think about that, I've often thought, is if you think about like a business, maybe a large business, with all the flow of transactions in and out, there's a whole set of bookkeeping and accounting staff that keep track of that. Well, that rostrum staff is in effect the accounting staff, the record keepers of all the things that occur here. They're the ones that verify exactly what action was taken on exactly what language at exactly what time, and they keep track of that to make sure that all is right and that the entries balance, as it were.
In addition to the orders of business that the staff accounts for, they must also pay attention to what reading the bill is on. There are 3 readings that a bill must go through. The first reading is when a bill is read in its original form to the members and assigned to a committee.
Fifth order of business, first reading of bills, introductions, and referrals. The Secretary will read.
The first reading happens in the fifth order of business.
Senate Bill 5784 by Senator Hasagawa, encouraging agency. Referred to the Committee on Labor and Commerce.
Before a measure can be considered on the floor of the Senate, it must be read. But of course, that would be literally physically impossible to read in their entirety the measures. So instead, the Secretary of the Senate is requested by the President to read the measure, but is interrupted by a last line.
Last line.
07.
Last line.
Pending RCW
Last line.
28.
Last line.
Referred to the Committee on Rules.
Members have before them is their laptop, and all of the measures, all the amendments, and all the necessary documents associated therewith are before them digitally.
The second reading assumes that a bill has been changed in the committee process and thus is read to the entire body, opening up for debate and consideration of new amendments. This is done in the sixth order of business.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I move that the Senate revert to the sixth order of business.
Members can submit amendments to pending bills pretty much right up until the last minute. And in order to do that, they walk up, generally, with the actual piece of paper to the bar of the House, we call it, which is that very front desk, and lay it in a certain rack. And it is then copied and distributed. Most of the votes are simply voice votes. So, for example, on an amendment, I will say the question before the Senate is the motion to adopt amendment number 0078. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, no.
Aye. Opposed, no.
And then, according to my ear,
the ayes appear to have it.
I will seek to determine whether the ayes or the noes have it. Before I rule, there's a slight pause to give an opportunity for those who disagree with what I've said to stand up and say, division.
Division's been called for. All those in favor of the amendment, please stand and remain standing until your vote has been counted.
And when they do that, if a sufficient number join in that request, and it's not very many, then there's a standing vote. I ask all those in favor stand, remain standing until your vote's counted.
After voting on each amendment, the new bill, which is now engrossed with these new amendments from the floor, will be officially moved to the third reading, also known as final passage.
Senate Bill 5414 on third reading and final passage. Remarks, Senator Hasagawa.
This is done during the seventh order of business when members debate and vote on the final version of the bill.
Trudeau, Valdez, Wagoner. Mr. President, 29 aye, 20 nay.
Having received a constitutional majority, engrossed substitute Senate Bill 5360 is declared passed. The title of the bill will be the title of the act.
So a complex set of rules actually governs the way in which deliberations occur on the floor of the state Senate. These things are very important. Decorum is very important because if you lose it, well, basically you've lost everything. If you get away from, is this a good bill or a bad bill, and here's why I think so, and get into, it's a bad bill because you're a bad person, frankly, then all is lost. The truth of the matter is, in a legislative chamber like this one, where hundreds and hundreds of bills will go through in the course of a session, it's really important to stay focused on the issue, because who may be your opponent on this issue today could very well be your ally on another bill tomorrow. So you want to preserve that relationship by keeping your arguments to the content and not to the personalities.
Think about how much tech you use every day. Your phone, a laptop, gaming console, social media, AI. It's everywhere. For the 2026 legislative session, in order for you to get a front row seat to the legislative process, the Teach with TVW team will be tracking and sharing information on bills related to potential government regulation of technology for minors. You will learn about this legislation while also learning about the extensive process bills must go through to become law. So, back to the technological front. Adults have tons of access to technology, but what about kids and teens? What should their access be? Should the government be able to control what kids and teens see on their phones? Lawmakers just kicked off the 2026 legislative session on January 12th, and these questions are front and center at the Washington State Legislature right now.
Persh Parker with the governor's office, testifying in support of.
You're watching the Impact Sine Die special coming to you inside the legislative building as lawmakers put the finishing touches on the 2026 session. Joining me now is Democratic Senator John Lovick, a former sheriff and longtime state trooper as well before you were a lawmaker. Thank you very much for your time today, Senator.
Thanks for having me.
So we appreciate your time on the last day of the session. I want to talk about some of the bills that you sponsored, or some of the legislation that you sponsored, dealing with accountability and eligibility requirements for sheriffs, chiefs, and marshals. What was the idea behind that?
The idea behind it, first of all, thanks for having me on and thanks for showing interest in this. The idea behind it is to make sure that we update our laws. We have not updated our laws with respect to sheriffs, police chiefs, and marshals in almost 200 years. And the idea is to make sure that our sheriffs, our police chiefs, and our marshals are held to the same standards, those same high standards that we hold everyone to, that they hold their subordinates to, that deputy, that police officer, that sergeant. That's the idea behind it.
Some of the criticism from opponents of the bill really centered around how it applied to sheriffs, and in particular the potential for a new avenue to basically vacate the office through decertification. Critics have called that an end run around the will of the voters. Do you see it that way?
It's not at all. The number one thing that they should know is that if they do their job to the best of their ability, they are not going to be impacted by this. But what they're going to do is they're going to let their subordinates know that whatever standards they are held to, we are holding ourselves to the same standards. As a state trooper, as a sergeant, as a county sheriff, I made sure that I held myself to the same high standards that we held our subordinates to. And that's the whole idea behind this legislation.
Can you talk a little bit about just sort of how your background, all your experience in law enforcement has informed your discussions, debates, and suggestions in the legislature?
So I was around a lot of great leaders when I started with the State Patrol. My first chief was Chief Will Bachhoffner, and I always watched what he did. And when I was a sergeant, I was around great leaders, and I wanted to make sure that as a leader, I wanted men to see me doing the work that they potentially wanted to do, but knowing that whatever I asked them to do, that I would do the same thing, that I would train the way they were trained, that I would be certified. When I became sheriff, I had been away from law enforcement for 3 years. The first thing I did was I went to the Criminal Justice Training Commission in Burien and got certified. I went to the national academies and the different things that we needed to do. So I wanted to make sure that I did the things that I expected them to do. And so that's how it has informed the ideas behind this legislation.
Was there any specific instance or example that led to that bill, as far as why now?
None whatsoever. We started working on this, I believe, in 2023. We worked on it in all of 2024, and we spent a lot of time last year, 2025, working on this. That was not any one thing, but we looked at what was not happening. If you look at the state of Georgia and the state of Texas, they have upgraded their policies with respect to sheriffs and police chiefs. And we just need to upgrade our laws, and that's what we're trying to do.
Another bill that I know you really pushed for, didn't make it across the finish line this year, would have lowered the legal alcohol threshold for DUI, the blood alcohol concentration, take us from 0.08%, which is what basically most of the country's on, to the 0.05% standard that Utah has. Why was that important, and how do you feel about what happened?
Well, I was a state trooper for 31 years, and I spent almost 7 years as sheriff. And when you look at what we have tolerated with respect to how many people are dying every year on our roads, and then the fact that 85% of the world's population are living under living at the area of 0.05 or lower, it's time for us to upgrade our laws. As far as how I felt about it, naturally I was disappointed because I've worked on it for almost 4 years, and we are going to get it done. It's going to take a while. I remember when I worked on the seatbelt legislation almost 20 years ago, it took 3 years to get that done. And so what I'm learning is that I'm just going to have to work a little bit harder. I take full responsibility for not getting this 0.05 over the finish line. I'm going to keep working on it until we get it done.
One idea that I heard proposed during testimony, I wondered if it was something that you had looked at or even had a chance to verify. Supposedly, there are a couple of states that have sort of a different category of offense that's triggered by that 0.05%. It's not exactly a DUI, but something along the lines of driving after consuming alcohol or something like that. Is there any appetite for something like that, or do you or any kind of compromise related to this legislation?
So we had a lot of different ideas. People were saying have a higher penalty for 0.15 and higher, and a lot of different things. Right now I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is making sure that our roads are some of the safest roads, safest streets in the country. And right now, the fact is that they are some of the most dangerous roads in the country. We're just killing a lot of people on our roads, and so I'm going to keep working at this. I know I'm going to have to work harder. You know, we got it out of the Senate. I just couldn't get it over the finish line in the House. But that doesn't mean we're not going to stop. We're going to keep working hard to make this happen.
If there are any other policy bills, law enforcement or otherwise, that really jump out at you from this session, or just discussions that you think stand out, what are those?
I was quite pleased with the work that we did. I was quite pleased with Senator Valdez's bill to the mask bill for police officers. I worked very, very well with him. He did a great job on that legislation. And I think that's something that I'm really pleased that we got it done.
In terms of your overall grade for this session, how would you rate this legislative session?
It's been a tough session. And I typically don't, if you go from 1 to 10, I would have to give us a 9 because we worked very, very hard. We got some important stuff done. We just really did what I think the citizens want us to do, to lead with integrity. And so I'm going to give us a 9 or close to a 10.
What's your perspective on the tax restructuring effort, the landmark legislation?
Yeah, there's been a lot of work on that. And there are a lot of things that we're going to have to do to make sure, obviously, it's going to probably end up in the courts. I think we made some tough decisions there. I'm pleased that we made those decisions to make it a fair process. I've been told many, many times that our tax structure was just out of whack with where it should be, so I'm happy with what we did.
Another, from a law enforcement perspective, I wonder if you have any thoughts about some of the legislation dealing with AI-related scams this year, the cryptocurrency ATMs, and there was a threshold discussion about capping the amount that people can spend in those in a day. primarily because of some scams that have been going around. I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that with all of those types of advances.
I work very closely. This is not my expertise, but I really listen to, what I do is I come to Olympia, I listen, I learn, I help, and then I try to lead in that area. I listened a lot to Representative Clyde Shavers and gathered a lot of information from him. He and I talk just about every single day. I voted on some of the legislation. I don't know all the details about it, but I think we're moving in the right direction with respect to AI and cryptocurrencies and all of those things that you talked about.
Senator Lovick, what issues or bills didn't get enough attention, maybe deserve a little more spotlight?
If I look at it from a personal perspective, I wish I would have had a little more time to work on some public safety bills. We're doing a lot of great work with respect to getting more officers on our streets. You probably know that we have 4 regional academies in our state now. We have one in Spokane, we have one in Pasco, one in Vancouver, one in Arlington, plus our big academy in Burien. I would like to see us do more to really recognize the great work that we are doing, getting more officers on our streets so that they can keep us safe in our homes, on our streets, and protect our children in their schools. We're doing a lot of great work in that area, but I want to do more with respect to getting more of those peace officers out in the communities.
We are almost out of time here. Any closing thoughts or anything we didn't get to that you want to add?
I think you've done a great job. The first time being on your show on the program, and I'm really happy to be here. Really as nervous as you expect me to be, but it's really great. You guys do a lot of great work.
Thank you so much. We're very glad to have you, and I can't tell if you are, at least not any more than me. So we do appreciate that, and that is Senator John Lovick. So thank you for joining us. Our Sine Night coverage continues with more House Republican perspective after the break. Stay with us.
Here on the southern shores of Lake Union at Mohi, the Museum of History and Industry. For many years, this was the Naval Reserve Center and the armory for Navy uses here in Puget Sound country. And if you go up on the 4th floor, you'll see where they train young sailors to be skippers of the ship because there weren't enough ships to trade on, so they used this building as an actual training location. It was the first command of many young sailors. Many museums concentrate on what happened after European settlers or Asian settlers came to the Pacific Northwest. But Mohi really concentrates on the people that were here before that as well. And their Native American stories and the learning experience about Native Americans is excellent here in this facility. Well, you've all heard about the B-17s and
And our Sine Die coverage continues now with House Republican Floor Leader April Connors of Kennewick. Representative Connors, good to see you. Thanks for your time today. It's been a very busy session and a couple of late nights for lawmakers here. Looking back on it, how would you rate the session overall? Was it a success?
Well, it depends on how you would rate success. No, I do not think it was successful at all for the people of the state of Washington. We've increased the budget in the state of Washington. We'll probably talk about the income tax at some point in time today. There are a few wins, but I overall would not rate it as successful for businesses or residents of Washington, especially concerning affordability.
So you mentioned that sort of marquee issue for the session was the legislation to create a new 9.9% tax on income above $1 million annually. And there are some tax offsets built into that. The governor has said this is a good chance to make the tax code more fair, give working families a break. What's your take?
Of course, my take all session has been that this is going to be a tax eventually on everyone. We've heard throughout, as this was proposed, that it was by the majority leader, this could be a pie crust promise, that promises are easily made, easily broken. We've heard from the Deputy Majority Leader on the House side in a Bellevue interview saying, look, you can't trust us. Like, it will eventually probably hit everyone if you look back at like what we've done to capital gains and other taxes. So I'm just really concerned for people of Washington that this is not going to be what is described as a millionaire's tax, but it's going to be a tax on everyone eventually, and that's what our constituents are saying. Very, very disappointed that we ended up not having a clause that it could go to the voters. I think that is one of the biggest problems. People voted 11 times not to have an income tax in Washington state, and here we are without the ability for the people to actually weigh in again. As you know, we had an epic floor fight on that tax, and I got to lead that floor fight. I had about a 20-minute break, but other than that, I was up for 24 hours at my desk helping lead our caucus to that battle. It was an epic bill. I mean, it was a bill that the Democrats have been wanting to run for probably a century and get it passed through the legislature, and so we did an epic battle on that bill as well.
I'll tell you that our instruments calculated the floor debate at all three sections between the breaks at exactly 24 hours, 1/60th of a second off from being precisely 24 hours on the nose there. Interesting the way that sort of shaped up. All that aside, what were some of the amendments that you wanted to see added? You mentioned a referendum option or a constitutional referendum. What was, do you think, a good idea that was not adopted? Well,
just to go back, in the intent section, there was language that said we intend to provide free school lunches to everyone in Washington state. If we really were going to do that, it actually should have been in the language of the bill, where we are saying in future, we're giving future promises to the people of Washington. Let's go back and in the future session and actually do this. So what some of the things that the House Democrats were saying were not necessarily, in my opinion, true. Like, yes, it says in the intent section we intend to do this, but to actually do it, it has to be in the language. And so seeing that, the pass-through income piece, I don't think that the majority party understood the pass-through income piece, especially for people that are farmers in our community, that they have S-corps or LLCs and they take their income, and then their income shows up in their tax return, but it doesn't necessarily mean that is actual income. It doesn't mean what they're taking home. They're most likely reinvesting it back into their farms, back into their businesses. So it's not just a tax on wealthy individuals. It is a tax on LLCs and S-corps. And that was one that we fought very hard. I think there were 4 or 5 amendments just on that one topic to try to get out of the bill with no movement, no issue to talk about it. So those were a couple of the really important ones. We tried to do some tax relief for farmers. We tried to do some savings programs for people with young kids. We tried to do add a prepared food exemption in it. Right now, as you know, you go to the grocery store, you don't pay tax on food. Well, times have changed. And I grew up in the 60s, 70s, and back then parents didn't take their kids out to dinner. I know personally, I told the story on the floor, my parents would, payday, we would get to go have pizza. It's different now. Parents are busy. Back in those days, there were a lot of moms that stayed home with their kids, and dads went to work, and it's not that way anymore. It's so unaffordable in the state of Washington that you're seeing almost all families having that both parents have to have an income. And so when you see that happen, they have to stop on the way home and get food. And so we tried to do an amendment that would have taken away the tax on food if you're grabbing it from McDonald's or from Burger King on the way home to be able to feed your family. And unfortunately, we couldn't get the kind of relief that we think would be really help with the affordability in Washington state.
Are there any bills that seem like wins? Any bills you proposed that you're pleased that made it across the finish line?
Well, this session for us was basically more about defense than trying to get through Republican bills. Personally, I had a couple that made it through that is going to be very helpful for our housing industry. But as a whole, our caucus worked really hard to basically play defense this session. I will say I was happy. I'm a real estate agent, so I have seen a lot of capital flight in my personal job and since we left session last year to now. And so I would say one of the things I'm happy about is the rollback of the estate tax, what we, of course we call the death tax in Washington, highest in the nation at 35% for top earners. I saw a lot of capital flight due to that tax in particular. And so the rollback of that last night was a big win for people in the state of Washington. I do still think we have one of the highest death tax in the nation, and I do think with the new income tax on high earners that we will continue to see capital flight. We just saw it in the news this week from the former CEO and founder of Starbucks.
So heading into 2027, which is a long way off, what do you predict at this point are likely to be hot topics, big debates next year?
Well, I think we'll continue to see, I think when we come back next year, you saw last year they passed the estate tax, which was the highest in the nation, and then this year they had to come back and roll it back because of capital flight. As a matter of fact, the person who proposed the bill said in committee, too many people are leaving the state of Washington over that. So I think when we come back next year, we will see the effects of what the income tax bill has done, and hopefully we will be having some future discussion on how we do that. My focus next year and my big fight is going to continue to be affordability for Washington State. I'm also very involved in the housing arena, and so trying to build more houses in Washington between our permitting processes and government regulations. Housing has become so expensive in Washington State. We're the third or fourth highest priced homes in the nation. So coming back and trying to do some real reform on how we create more housing in Washington will be a top priority for me as well.
What is your perspective on some of the law enforcement oversight or tech oversight legislation that passed? The updated eligibility requirements, new decertification pathways for agency leaders legislation, or the flock camera restrictions. What are your thoughts about those?
Sure. The flock camera restrictions actually kind of came around and was fairly supported by both caucuses when it came around, due to the fact that it added in, misdemeanors, and so the police officers could actually be able to use that system. I know our particular in Richland and Kennewick uses it extensively to help find people that are doing the bad things in our streets. So I'm glad that the legislation came out in a place that our law enforcement officers were okay with it. As far as the sheriff decertification, I have a lot of concerns about that bill. Obviously, we fought pretty hard on that bill as well. I think we went over 8 hours. People elect our sheriffs. We shouldn't have people appointed by the governor of the state of Washington that can take away that certification. There is a process for that, and I can tell you that we had that process happen in Benton County, where we took our sheriff up on recall and had him come out of office. And so we already had a process to do that. So very disappointed that went through this session. I am very in support of our law enforcement officers and our local sheriffs. So that will be something that we'll have to take a relook at next session to see what we can do to help try to fix that.
We're almost out of time. Anything that didn't get enough attention this year that you want to highlight, or anything to summarize?
Sure. I think what didn't get enough attention this year is we saw a lot of bills. Some of them died, which was good. That would have made things more expensive in Washington. And we did not focus on affordability. We focused on raising taxes on people. People are crying. They're saying we are taxed too much, from the gas tax on fuel. We're the third highest gas prices in the nation. We have some of the highest grocery prices on the nation. And this year, it seemed to me like there was no focus from the majority party on affordability. The focus was to grow government this year. And so next year, we'll be back to focus on what matters to actual people in Washington State, which is affordability.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Representative Connors. And coming up, we will have Democratic Representative Lauren Davis. After a break, please stay with us.
But many years ago, this was disputed territory between the British and the Americans, and no one was really sure who would end up being the owner. John Jacob Astor was a wealthy financier from New York City, but he knew the fur trade business. He saw the popularity of beaver pelt hats, and he thought, if I could establish forts up and down the Columbia River, he could make a fortune. His plan was good, but carrying it out didn't work so well. He sent an overland party here to the Pacific Northwest that had tremendous difficulties. He sent a ship around Cape Horn. They had tremendous difficulties. He did establish a small trading company, and he did establish this fort and another one down by Astoria, Oregon, which is named after John Jacob Astor. But the whole operation really fell apart. The War of 1812 took place. The Northwest Company, a British company, took over, and later the long-established Hudson Bay Company took over this property. The site is still here, the history is still here. It's now managed by the Colville Indian tribe, and we thank them for their many efforts to keep this site open to the public and available to all of us. Fort Okanagan, part of our history, part of
Welcome back to TVW's Sine Die special coverage. I'm Mike McClanahan here with Democratic Representative Lauren Davis. Representative, thank you so much for your time today. Looking back on the 60 days, sort of flew by from my perspective. There was a lot of long debates during those 60 days. How would you rate the session?
Oh gosh, I think short sessions present unique challenges. Budget deficits present especially unique challenges. I mean, a lot of my work and the reason I ran for the legislature has to do with the human services realm, and so it's been painful to watch programs that help vulnerable Washingtonians get reduced and you're playing a lot of defense. So that's been hard, and I wait with bated breath for the opportunity when the state's fiscal portrait will improve.
Before the session, you put out a few pre-filed bills that would impact various aspects of public safety and the courts to some extent. I want to get your take on why this legislation would be needed. The bill to address youth gun violence and create an alternative process, an alternative pathway specifically for those circumstances. Is that the idea?
Yes, so that was a bill that was new this year, and a couple things. So just this past weekend in my district in the city of Linwood, in a span of 48 hours, we had 2 shootings of juveniles shooting other juveniles. And I wish I could tell you that were an anomaly in Linwood, but it's not. The district that I represent is unfortunately been plagued by significant youth violence, primarily firearm violence, some of it gang-related. I've got the northern portion of Aurora, where we have all sorts of issues with pimps, including juvenile pimps, and then up in Linwood, some of the gang challenges. So that's where I come to this from. I also come to it from a place of believing that if we can provide adequate resources and supports and interventions, then we can think about alternatives to incarceration. The problem with our system is we have all these evidence-based interventions and they're expensive, so we don't fund them. And so the idea behind the bill was to actually generate a funding source where we could really provide a Cadillac level of care as sort of a proof of concept for youth who are carrying firearms, and we would fund that with an increase in the concealed pistol license fee, which hadn't been increased since 1995 when I was in 3rd grade. So that was the concept. Didn't advance this year. I look forward to continuing the conversation next year, but I think it's very timely and certainly needed for my district in particular.
Let's talk about legislation to restore funding for crime victim services. What's the idea behind that, and what are your plans with that in the future?
Yeah, so that has to do. It was largely driven by challenges at the federal level, and it wasn't a cut per se at the federal level, but our crime victim services in this state that support victims of sexual assault, human trafficking, domestic violence, and other violent crime are funded in large part from a pot of federal funding called VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, and the revenues are actually from large federal fines and forfeitures and seizures, and so it's a very volatile funding source because if you don't have sort of a windfall case, you can have depleted funds and then that flows down to the states. So we've had a significant decline in funds for the last 6 years, and so every year the poor victims advocate community has to come and beg for one thing, which is just one-time funding. Please shore up funding with the state general fund to avoid cuts. And so they've done that dutifully for every year for the last 6 years, and we've funded those one-time sort of top-ups, but what we really need is a sustainable solution. And mind you, we have increased victim service capacity 0. That's really just making sure that we're maintaining the status quo. These are very low-paid positions, high turnover, and as somebody who received victim advocacy services on 2 separate occasions for domestic violence, I have a personal understanding of how important and life-saving those services are.
And let's transition to House Joint Resolution 4211. This would create an interbranch commission on court rules to assess whether a proposed court rule violated the Equal Powers Clause, I believe. Anyway, can you kind of give me the idea, why did you come up with this? What's behind this?
Yeah, so it is my belief, and a belief that's shared broadly, including in the legal community, that the Supreme Court has been out of their lane, that they have been essentially legislating with robes on, and that is not lawful under the state constitution and separation of powers. And a couple most extreme examples of that, one would be their new caseload standards related to indigent defense, which has massive implications for the state budget. The legislature is the appropriating branch, not the court. Another glaring example would be a court rule that they declared related to basically pausing the ability to issue juvenile warrants in juvenile criminal cases, except for a very, very narrow set of extremely severe circumstances. And so in practice, what's happening is we can no longer enforce court orders against juveniles, whether that's treatment conditions like mental health or substance use, if they cut off their ankle monitor, if they flee, if they fail to appear in court, if they violate curfew, if they don't go to school, we can't enforce court orders. And if you have a young person who has a developing brain, which is well acknowledged, and they learn that there are no consequences for not following the court order, we're not going to get the outcomes that we're looking for, and it's going to endanger public safety. The Court of Appeals actually overturned that court rule because it was so blatantly in violation of the legislature's ability to write statute and determine penalties for violations of the criminal code. So they overturned it in this beautiful decision where they said that it is the province of the legislature alone to sort of set these criminal rules, and then the Supreme Court judges the legality and constitutionality of their own rule. So it's sort of the fox guarding the hen house. So they wrote the rule, and then it gets appealed to them, and then they say, yes, we like our own rule. And so there's no, unlike everything else in government, there's no check or balance on their power for court rules when they legislate via court rule.
How was that received by your colleagues?
Well, clearly not very well in the Democratic circles, in the sense that it wasn't even given a hearing. So we couldn't even denied the opportunity to even have a conversation about it, which I think is really unfortunate. Court rules are not as public in the sense that the public doesn't track them the way you track like a bill number, and there's not these public hearings of the same magnitude, and it's very subtle, and I think it's really important that the public is aware, and that when the public has learned about what the court has been doing, broadly, they've been terribly upset, but I think there's a lack of awareness about what's been happening, and the totally unchecked power of the court.
Do you plan to bring that back next year?
Yes, most certainly. I think we need to continue the conversation. I mean, it is very difficult to pass a constitutional amendment. I'm not naive about that. It requires a 2/3 majority, so you're going to have to get broad bipartisan support. But I do think, at a minimum, we need to start having a conversation about the court overreaching its limits. The legislative branch needs to stand up for itself.
What's your perspective on some of the public safety legislation that did pass this year?
Yeah, well, a lot lot of it didn't pass.
Block cameras or the masking, or I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Sure, no, that's helpful. Yeah, so I think we were trying to strike a balance with the automated license plate readers. I believe that they do have significant utility for locating missing persons, for identifying individuals involved in violent crime. In Washington State, 62% of all violent crime is unsolved, and that includes a significant number of homicide cases. And I work a lot with homicide victims' families, and families are denied justice because there's not evidence. And so there is a utility there, but by all means, we need to make sure that there's adequate protections, because the current federal administration has shown that they will take our Medicaid data, for example, to use for immigration purposes. I mean, they appear to have no bounds on what they're willing to do, and to use it for ICE enforcement, or for perhaps trying to target individuals receiving protected health care services. So, I mean, I feel like it may have been imperfect, but I feel like there was a good effort to try to strike a balance, and I appreciated the bipartisan negotiations on that bill.
What's your take on just the fiscal change, the tax code changes this year. Overall, there were some bills that were passed last year, sort of repealed. This one major marquee bill did pass. What's your take on it?
Great question. I certainly support progressive revenue. I think it's well known that we have a terribly regressive tax code, and that works in favor of the wealthiest and is an incredible disservice to middle-class Washingtonians, working families, to our lower-income families who are struggling and living on the margins. So I was proud to support the millionaire's tax. I was also very appreciative of the efforts to address some of the regressivity of our tax code in that bill and to provide some relief in the form of whether it's child care or free school meals or reduction in the sales tax on hygiene products or diapers or things of that nature. Do I think it's enough? No. It's always a challenge. It's always a push-pull because as a lawmaker, my day is full of 10-minute meetings hearing about needs in our community, and all of them have merit, and there's never enough resources. And at the same time, I hear constantly back home about affordability, and so we can't just tax the pants off of people. We have to be thoughtful and strategic and balanced in that approach.
We're almost out of time. Anything we didn't get to, anything you want to summarize?
I appreciate the question. I mean, I think we still have a tremendous amount of work to do in areas of addressing juvenile violence, in areas related to mental health and substance use challenges. We continually hear, just even in public opinion surveys, about the importance of those twin issues of behavioral health and public safety and crime, and I look forward to continuing to work on those issues. I think there's bipartisan solutions that can be reached.
Thank you very much for your time. That's Representative Lauren Davis. After the break, we'll take a closer look at Washington's efforts to regulate artificial intelligence and how those proposals compare with federal legislation. Stay with us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. I really
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
the opportunity to be included.
Here we are in the Kettle River Valley, one of the most beautiful locations of our state. And on this knoll overlooking the valley is the gravesite of Ranald McDonald. McDonald was the son of a Hudson Bay Company explorer and an Indian princess, born at Fort George at the mouth of the Columbia River. He was well educated. He became interested in the Pacific Ocean and the sea, and he took a job on a whaling ship. And while they were whaling off the coast of Japan, he wanted to learn more and more about Japan, and he asked this captain to let him go ashore. Japan was closed at the time, and he risked his life in doing this, but he took a small boat and rowed ashore. He actually capsized the boat partially so the Japanese would think he was in distress. When he got into the shore and was captured by the Japanese, he began to teach them English. And he's now today considered the first English teacher in Japan. Many Japanese visitors come here to this site every year to see his grave and pay their respects. It's an incredible story and one of those that make this one of my most favorite places.
During the 1980s, there were many people in our state who were enthusiastically awaiting the state's centennial, our 100th birthday for the state of Washington. A young new legislator was elected from Grays Harbor County, He came to the Capitol and wanted to honor our state's maritime industry and history with their creation and the building of a new replica tall ship, the Lady Washington, the actual ship that Captain Robert Gray used when he sailed first time into Gray's Harbor. And the ship was built. Craftsmen came from all over the Pacific Northwest, and pretty soon right there on the ways in Aberdeen and Hoquiam, we saw this beautiful ship emerge.
You ready?
I'm ready.
And welcome back to TVW's live Sine Die coverage. I'm joined now by our very own Jennifer Huntley, host of Washington to Washington. Jennifer, we've been covering some AI regulation efforts here in Olympia. You've been looking at both state and national legislation surrounding artificial intelligence. Tell us about that.
That's right. We're going to be focusing on it for our next Washington to Washington show. And really, the session was really significant this year just in terms of the number of bills that were presented regarding AI. It was kind of twofold. On the other hand, not a lot passed, but this is something that is, of course, expected to come up over the next few sessions. One thing that was really significant, though, was just the reaction and the focus on AI that lawmakers had. Very different from many years ago with social media, where, there were lessons learned, that there was not a lot of regulation, and there obviously things didn't happen to sort of get a handle on it. So there were efforts now, I think, from lawmakers both here and in other states to learn more about AI and sort of understand its impacts on all aspects of life.
And in particular, you're looking at the generative AI interactions with youth. That is a key part of your upcoming program. Can you talk a little bit about who the players are in that discussion?
Yeah, well, I think lawmakers are trying to accomplish, a lot with AI regulation, and it's not going to all happen overnight. Like the rest of us, they're sort of trying to learn what AI is all about, and its impacts so far on society. But there really is a balance, and that's what we learned a lot about, between regulating and, of course, encouraging innovation. I think one of the big players involved initially was the Attorney General's AI Task Force. They were set up by the legislature in 2024, and so they were involved in sort of doing a lot of research and learning about AI, and then put forward policy initiatives for the start of this session. Really, a lot of the focus, as I mentioned, has been on AI chatbots, and the task force heard a lot about, unfortunately, young people who took their own lives after conversing with a chatbot. And so a big focus of this session was on mental health, establishing guardrails for teens, and part of the legislation that was passed was just reminding adults and teens every 3 hours for adults and every 1 hour for teens that they're conversing with a chatbot.
Well, there are so many different possible angles related to AI. Just here in Olympia, there were bills that related to AI-enabled dynamic real-time pricing in person, in the grocery store. Not that it's happening, but the idea that it could was the impetus for the bill. Or to AI-powered scams, trying to put some guardrails up on the machines that are now frequently used as part of those scams. But when it comes to how these interactions have impacted young people, sometimes tragically, there seemed to be bipartisan traction for that right away. That was the one issue that sort of cut through a lot of the noise and a lot of the other ideas. Does that play out the same way in other states from what you've seen?
Yeah, legislation, there were hundreds of bills and measures at the start of January of this year in states, at least 27 states sought AI legislation. Now, of course, that was a range. Some of it focused on education, some of it focused on healthcare, but a lot of it was bipartisan and really focused on safety for young people, and specifically with these chatbots. And what's been really interesting to watch is just sort of the difference in the strong emphasis on legislation on AI in states nationwide, and what's happening in D.C. President Trump issued an executive order, as you know, back in 2025, the end of 2025 in December, and he said that, hey, this patchwork of laws is just not going to work and it's going to hinder innovation, and that he wants to have more federal oversight over AI legislation. For our Washington to Washington show, we interviewed Congressman Michael Baumgartner, as well as Congresswoman Marilyn Strickland, both Washington U.S. congressional folks. And Congressman Baumgartner introduced legislation this year that essentially codifies what Trump is asking for. And when we talked to him, he said, this is important and this is a matter of national security. He said, we are in an AI race with China, and that's why it's so important to have federal oversight of AI laws. Congresswoman Strickland said that, we should be able to do both. She's much more pragmatic in terms of we should be able to do innovation, but if states aren't seeing the federal government step up and regulate AI, they should have the right to do it. So, naturally there's going to be a lot of questions surrounding that, and in terms of who has more impact, whether it'll be states or the federal government, or we'll see this maybe play out in courts depending on what happens with legislation.
Thank you very much for your time, Jennifer. As the legislative session winds down, there will be a Washington to Washington in the works in the near future, and we thank Jennifer for her time and thank you for yours. Whether you're listening on a phone, a tablet, a computer, or a television, we're glad you could join us. All of our Sine interviews will be available on tvw.org and through the Impact podcast. Washington to Washington is also available on both platforms. Join me next Wednesday at 7 for more in-depth interviews you won't find anywhere else. For TVW, I'm Mike McClanahan signing off from the state capitol. Goodbye.